Hi, Jillian Pensavalle.
Oh, hey, Patrick Hines.
Fam, we are breaking into the feed with a very important announcement and a feed drop of an episode of our dear, dear, dear friend Bob Ruff's podcast, Truth and Justice. Jillian, tell them everything.
Yeah, so this is season 15. You know how much we love the whole team at Truth and Justice over here.
I know.
So season 15 just dropped, and this season, Bob is investigating the 2001 murder of DeMario Lowe's and the wrongful conviction of Jody Hill, who is a black trans woman.
Yeah.
So this is in Bob's hometown. So he has like boots on the ground. He's doing this investigation because you know Truth and Justice does like the crowdsourced investigation in real time.
In real time.
It's amazing. If you don't know the work of Truth and Justice, like please check out this season, but please like check out the rest because it's really incredible work that they do.
I was going to say, Bob's righteous indignation about this case in particular, he emailed us. He's like, I've never asked anybody to do anything. Can you please do this feed drop? This case needs as many eyes and ears on it as possible. The powers that be in this case are messing with Bob, and you do not do that.
I said to Bob sent me something that someone was sent to him that you'll learn about. And I said, oh, this guy just had like the last good night's sleep he'll ever have. Because the Truth and Justice Army, like I promise you.
Yeah.
Because what's happening, so his boots on the ground investigation has already revealed a systematic problem in the city of Benton Harbor, Michigan.
Yeah.
There's a lot there. Bob goes into all of it. So, but what he's also doing is highlighting other unsolved murders in the city.
Yes.
So it's not just one case, one person. So he's kind of shining a light on everything that's going on here. So, you know, Bob, all he wants to find is truth and justice. So it's not just a clever name. But it's all about like the victims and the city. Like he wants real change for the community, the stories that he has about the people he's met like in this work. So it's really, really amazing. And we just, we love Bob and we love the team at Truth and Justice. He's also like has some new people that he's working with and they're like high school students.
Oh my God.
Doing like the music and the research. So like the team is doing just such like pure, such amazing work and we love them.
So listen to episode 1 right here and then run over to the Truth and Justice feed and subscribe wherever you listen. Support Bob, support this work. And the episodes and the series are just like fascinating. Like you're going to be roped in from the second you start.
Yeah. And if you want to join the army and the fight for justice, go to their Facebook group because that's where like so many of these conversations happen. And he does like the follow-ups and you can submit questions. So if you want to be a part of it, I will see you over there in the Truth and Justice Facebook group. I'm here to fight, Bob. I got you.
All right, go listen. And we love you, family. We love you, Bobby.
Love you.
All right, bye.
Note to the listener. After production of this episode was complete, director Dan McGinnis sent a response to Bob's June 12th email. The contents of that response will be covered in a future episode. Welcome to season 15.
Gunfire rang out in Benton Harbor this afternoon, and tonight one man there is dead.
Breaking news this midday, police responding to a deadly shooting in Benton Harbor. It took place this morning at a business on Milton Street.
Police in Benton Harbor right now responding to a shooting at the Highland Project.
The city of Benton Harbor is working to keep the peace tonight.
This is after a black man was shot and killed by a white officer after the man apparently fired at police.
Charged in a deadly weekend shooting outside of Benton Harbor bar, 24-year-old Lazarick Allen Boyd faces murder and firearm charges.
Police are on the hunt for a man they say is armed and very dangerous and could be in your area. Police say Uriah Buford is a suspect in a shooting that happened in Benton Harbor.
I don't have anything to lose. I have no secrets to hide. I could just be blunt and people could judge it however they judge it.
From NBI Studios, this is Truth and Justice, a crowdsourced investigation in real time. I'm Bob Ruff.
All right, we're heading across the bridge.
Good luck, guys.
See ya. Ready?
That was me and Erica walking out of Zach's tattoo shop in the heart of downtown St. Joseph, Michigan. Just a short 20-minute drive from our studio. Zach co-hosts our Friday follow-up episodes and also happens to be responsible for most of the artwork that covers my arms. For Erica, a former student of mine who now works with me co-producing the show, this was her first day working outside the office. And what a pleasant beginning to her new career. We stepped out of the shop onto State Street, which of course was bustling with summer tourists. St. Joe is the place for the well-to-do. It sits atop a gorgeous bluff overlooking the iconic Silver Beach. Most people, when they think of Michigan, they think of Detroit or Ann Arbor. But for those in the know, St. Joe is a hidden gem. Imagine spending a beach day at the ocean, but without the salt water. That's Silver Beach. For most people, their first trip to Lake Michigan leaves them in awe, because it is like an ocean. The water stretches out as far as the horizon will allow your eyes to see. And the Silver Beach area comes complete with a perfectly maintained splash pad, a carousel, a kids museum, and of course, a St. Joe staple, Silver Beach pizza. On top of the bluff, you'll find bougie restaurants, ice cream and candy shops, and lots of independently owned mom-and-pop type stores. The streets are brick, and the people are always smiling. Mostly white people. St. Joe is a white person's paradise. It's a small city at just 4.8 square miles and has a population of around 8,000 people, 90.3% of whom are white. On any given day in the summer, you can add at least another 1,000 people to that census. That's when the tourists come to town, many traveling from Chicago to get out of the city and take in the quaintness of small-town Southwest Michigan. The crime rate in St. Joe is nearly non-existent. The total crime rate, not violent crimes, but total crime rate, is just 18 crimes per year per 1,000 residents, a stat that falls 29% below the national average. The city is truly the pride of Southwest Michigan. But that's not where Erica and I have been spending our days working. We just stopped in to chat with Zach before heading to a very different place. A place where most of the people that we just passed on State Street would never step foot. And in fact, most of them would shudder at even the idea of visiting. We were headed across the bridge into the city of Benton Harbor. The stretch of river that separates what were once known as the Twin Cities is barely wider than a football field. And yet somehow crossing that bridge feels like crossing over into a completely different world. In stark contrast to St. Joe, Benton Harbor, with its nearly identical size and population, has one of the highest violent crime rates in the country. According to NeighborhoodScout.com, quote, with a crime rate of 64 per 1,000 residents, Benton Harbor has one of the highest crime rates in America compared to all communities of all sizes. From the smallest towns to the very largest cities, one's chance of becoming a victim of either violent or property crime here is 1 in 16. End quote. A website called CityData.com calculates crime rates in an index for cities throughout the U.S. Benton Harbor's crime index stands at 986.1. That is 4 times higher than the United States average. To put that into perspective, its twin city, St. Joe, has a crime index of just 156. According to that same website, Benton Harbor's crime index is higher than 99.6% of U.S. cities. It is a dangerous and violent place. And in stark contrast to St. Joe's 90% white population, Benton Harbor residents are over 90% black. And that's the statistic that the uninformed and the ignorant hang their hats on. But there is a difference between correlation and causation. Benton Harbor is an overwhelmingly black community. It is also an incredibly violent community. A quick look at any local Facebook post or comment section on a news story about any kind of violence in the area will show you that many people, today, in 2024, actually believe that the causation of the violence in Benton Harbor is the fact that the community is primarily black. I've read comments just this week saying things like, quote, keep those animals on their side of the river, or it'd be nice if all those thugs would just kill each other and clean up the streets, end quote. It's both disgusting and shocking how narrow-minded people can be. The truth of the matter is that it's not a race problem at all. The major driving factor is poverty. In 2022, the median household income in Benton Harbor was $26,592 a year. Over 47% of Benton Harbor families live in poverty. But But things weren't always so dire in Benton Harbor. There was a time when the city of Benton Harbor was the place to be in Berrien County. When I began investigating the wrongful conviction case that we'll be covering this season, I quickly learned that before we can even begin to tell you the story that you've tuned in for, you first have to have an understanding of how we got here. How the good people of Benton Harbor found themselves trapped in this vicious cycle. We were in desperate need of a history lesson, and we found just the man for the job.
Hey, how you doing?
Chuck?
Yep. Bob?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, how you doing?
Good. Nice to meet you. This is Erica.
Hi, Erica. How you doing?
Chuck Jaeger is the executive director of the Morton House Museum, an organization that considers themselves to be the home of Benton Harbor history. When I sat down to talk to Chuck, he explained that even before the racial divide existed, there has always been animosity between the Twin Cities, dating back to the late 1800s.
You know, they call it the Twin Cities, but there has always been a kind of a tension between St. Joe and Benton Harbor. So St. Joe's a little bit earlier, 1820s. The Mortons, where we're in the Morton House today, were the first non-Native American settlers on this side of the river. So farmers here. And the story is told back then that in 1859, the bridge from St. Joe to Benton Harbor was washed out by a spring flood. So Henry Morton, one of the people who lived here, Stern Brunson and Charles Hull went across the river to St. Joe and said, hey, let's work together to rebuild the bridge. And the people of St. Joe that they talked to said, we don't really care if there's a bridge or not. Just, kind of look down the hill at them and stuff. So they rebuilt the bridge, those guys did, and they also built Benton Harbor Ship Canal. And so that's what really made Benton Harbor, really started Benton Harbor, is that ship canal, which made it in a lake port. Even though downtown Benton Harbor is about a mile from Lake Michigan, now the ships could bypass St. Joe and go right into downtown Benton Harbor. And Stanley Morton, Henry's son, ran steamships between here and Chicago, brought fruit over to Chicago and brought tourists over here. And those ships came right into downtown Benton Harbor. But we also have stories, too, between St. Joe and Benton Harbor. Certainly there's a racial factor today between the two towns. We can talk about that. But it goes back even before that. So we have stories that we've documented here of people would be ice skating on the river back then. And the people from St. Joe and Benton Harbor would get into fights, pull off their skates and slash each other. Baseball games sometimes turned violent between the St. Joe teams and the Benton Harbor teams, right? So there was always that rivalry, even when Benton Harbor was mostly white. And the other thing that happened is there have been a couple efforts at unification, because logically it ought to be one city. I'm not sure it makes sense that there are two cities here. But in the 1890s, there was a pretty serious merger attempt between St. Joe and Benton Harbor. The state legislature got involved. Looked like it was going to happen. And ironically enough, it came down to the name of the new joint city. St. Joe refused to give up the name St. Joe, and the people in Benton Harbor, proud of their city, and they said, why should we, take on that name? And so it fell apart. So, because I think if you think about it, it's this situation in terms of race is not different than most other big cities. It's just that in those other cities, it's usually a part of town, right, where that is predominantly African American. Here you have a separate city that's predominantly African American.
Over the course of about a century, the population of Benton Harbor shifted slowly from primarily white to almost exclusively black.
There have always been African Americans in Benton Harbor since the Civil War, about 2 or 3% in the late 1800s. And then that starts to grow a little bit in the 1920s, but especially in Benton Harbor, it's the 1940s, 50s, and 1960s, where you see the transition from Benton Harbor being a mostly white city to a mostly African American city. And that is part of the Great Migration of African Americans from the rural South up to the urban north. So nationally, it's the Great Migration is kind of World War I up until the 70s. Benton Harbor is a little bit later. It's more the 50s and 60s especially.
100 years ago, Benton Harbor was actually pretty progressive compared to most cities. They hired their first black police officer in 1929, a man named Dove Bruce. This was over 30 years before the Civil Rights Act was enacted, which, among other things, allowed black people to purchase and own property for the first time, which is something to keep in mind as we move along. Prior to 1964, even though so many people of color were moving into the city, none of them were allowed to own the homes that they lived in, a situation that proved to be a recipe for later disaster in black communities nationwide. An exhibit in the Morton House breaks down the evolution of the population of Benton Harbor from 1890 through the year 2000. In 1890, only 3.6% of residents were black. The first notable increase came in the 1930 census, where that number nearly doubled to 6%. The overall population of the city saw some notable growth over those 4 decades as well, jumping from 3,600 to over 15,000. Benton Harbor's population peaked just before the Civil Rights Act was passed. According to the 1960 census, the city's population at that time was 19,136, with 25% of those residents being black. So at that point in history, you had over 4,800 people of color living in the 4.7 square miles of Benton Harbor. And none of them owned the homes that they were living in. During this time frame, from the turn of the century into the 50s, things were looking great. The city was booming and droves of people were migrating north to be a part of it.
Benton Harbor was very much an industrial town, lots of factories. And so those jobs were an attraction to people coming from the south to come up to the north. And we even have stories of companies sometimes going to the south and recruiting African Americans and providing transportation for people to come up.
For those that were alive and around Southwest Michigan up into the late 50s and early 60s, Benton Harbor was the place to be.
So Benton Harbor really takes off in the late 1800s with lots of factories, lots of businesses moving in here. But I'd say the heyday is kind of the 20s through the 50s. You know, and nationally, the 1920s is the Roaring 20s, and it is in Benton Harbor too. There's all kinds of buildings put up in the 1920s. So the Vincent Hotel, which is our tallest building, was 1920s. The Fidelity Building, a whole bunch of different buildings were put up in the 1920s. So economically, Benton Harbor was certainly doing well in that time period. They get hit in the 1930s like everybody does with the Great Depression. 1940s is World War II. And then 1950s, I think, especially, is just a kind of the golden age for Benton Harbor, if you look at it in terms of economics. In Southwest Michigan, it's the place to shop. It's the place to go to the movies. So we have the Liberty Theater, this huge 1920s movie palace. The State Theater starts in the 1940s. It's the place to stay in a hotel. Main Street is on the main road between Chicago and Detroit. So you have lots of traffic. And St. Joe is kind of a sleepy little town, you know, not that economically stuff. But Benton Harbor is really the economic driver of Southwest Michigan, right? It's kind of the place. It's kind of a economic dynamo.
Things really started to break bad in the 60s. While many black Americans left the South to start new lives in the more progressive North, racism was still very much alive and well. In principle, people might have said that they believed in integration and believed people of color should have the same rights as the white population, but the reality was when push came to shove, those progressive white folks most certainly didn't want to have black families as their neighbors. And since those black families, who were working for the lowest wages in town and didn't own their homes and had no real financial means to speak of, were unable to move away from their white neighbors, the white neighbors left and moved out to the country.
So the change really, I think, is a number of factors. And one is, again, nationally, we have suburbanization, where in the late 1800s, early 1900s, people were massively moving to cities. We have urbanization. After World War II, we have suburbanization, right? And that's partly government policy, encouraging people to move out of the cities, that kind of thing. But in this area, people are moving out of Benton Harbor, moving to St. Joe Township, Stevensville, right? Lakeshore area is a big thing. And combined with that is what we would call white flight. Unfortunately, there's a number of white people in Benton Harbor who say, if these Black people are going to be moving into Benton Harbor, then we don't want to live in the same neighborhood as Black people. And so we're going to move out to some other place. The other big factor, or a couple other big factors, is I-94. So again, Main Street is kind of the main connector between St. Joe and Benton Harbor. So lots of people are stopping there. In 1960, 62, I-94 is built, and lots of businesses start to move out there. And even before that was Fairplain Plaza, which I think is late 50s, early 1960s, started the movement of retail, businesses, commercial businesses moving out of the downtown core there. And so Benton Harbor starts to lose a lot of its tax space, right? It starts to really suffer in terms of government tax revenue, things like that. And then the other big factor is kind of deindustrialization. So all those factories start to go somewhere else. They go to the American South or they go to other countries. And Whirlpool is a good example, right? So we used to manufacture in Benton Harbor washing machines for Whirlpool. And now they manufacture those washing machines in other countries or down south in Tennessee, places like that. That's the big one. So we see a really change where by 1980s or so, downtown Benton Harbor is almost a ghost town.
The complete flip in population from 1960 to 1980 is shocking. Remember, in 1960, the overall population of Benton Harbor was over 19,000 people, and the Black population made up 25% of that. Just 10 years later, in 1970, the overall population was down by about 600. But the percentage of Black residents doubled from 25% to 52%. Then in 1980, the overall population dropped by another 4,000, and the Black population then made up 86% of city residents. So in just 20 years, Benton Harbor went from a thriving industrial city with a population near 20,000 and was 25% Black to a ghost town with a population of 14,000, 86% of whom were Black. Like I hinted at a few minutes ago, in hindsight, it's easy to see that this was going to happen. Draw the Black families into the city with low-paying jobs. They live in properties owned by the white people and are employed at businesses owned by those same people. They don't have the means to leave the city when the white population flees when the jobs go away. And there they are left in a tragic situation, in an impoverished city with no way out. The problem then begins compounding on itself. Racial tensions started to grow. While people outside the city may not have seen it, the people of Benton Harbor surely could see that the white population was thriving while they had no way to get out or get ahead. In 1967, the race riots began in Benton Harbor, as they were going on nationwide, which of course led to more violence, which led to a continuation of the white flight, which led to more poverty.
So we have the Watts riots in LA in 65 and Detroit riots in 67. So I think it was a period of, and also riots after the assassination of Martin Luther King in 1968. So you have a number of years there from kind of 65 through, 68, 69, where we have racial disturbances going on throughout the country. Specifically in this case, I know there were kind of a couple of race riots in Benton Harbor, but one was a Black person being attacked and kind of set some things off. And I know that one of the instances was kids kind of destroying trophy cases and stuff at Benton Harbor High School, right? So property damage. I think the one Black person did die in the one riot, but don't have huge loss of life there, but certainly property damage, disturbances, or unrest, right, that's going on there. So
did that contribute to more of the kind of white flight out of the city?
I think absolutely. I think it very much was part of that, where people saw those headlines and those kind of things. And, it's typical where if you look at it overall, people are probably really pretty safe, but they see something in the paper, they hear something on the radio or TV, and they get scared and decide. So I think that did accelerate things also, I'm sure, certainly.
The city of Benton Harbor never really recovered from the race riot days of the 60s. By that point, the city was viewed by outsiders as a dangerous place that wasn't safe for white people. The factories were gone, the jobs were gone, and the only people left carrying the torch for the city were the folks that didn't have the financial means to leave. Like I said at the beginning, it's not a race thing, it's a poverty thing. It just so happened that in Benton Harbor and other cities and neighborhoods just like it all around the country, it was the black people who, by no fault of their own, were the poorest people in these communities. So that was the evolution of Benton Harbor. At the turn of the 20th century, it was a growing city comprised of about 3% black families. By 1960, it was a booming industrial town with a population of over 19,000 people with a 25% black population. And that takes us to today, where Benton Harbor's population sits at 9,000 residents and is a nearly 90% black community. And even that number is a bit skewed. And that's because in the late 90s, there was an attempt at revitalizing downtown Benton Harbor. And it worked. Sort of. Really what happened was gentrification. The Arts District was created, now full of trendy restaurants and breweries, art galleries and studio apartments. White people shit. And that's exactly what you'll find in the Arts District. It's basically an extension of St. Joe. And even though the Arts District is situated in the very violent and dangerous Benton Harbor, people feel safe there. And for good reason. The Arts District is the only area in Benton Harbor that seems to be heavily policed. Erica and I ate lunch one day at the Mason Jar Cafe in the district before heading into the neighborhood where the murder occurred that we're investigating. Lunch was delicious. I had an arugula salad with goat cheese, candied pecans, avocado, and dried cherries topped with a balsamic vinaigrette. Like I said, white people shit. But what I noticed was that during the 40 minutes that we sat there eating, I saw squad cars drive by on at least 3 occasions. And here's the problem. Over the last few weeks, we have spent many hours canvassing the neighborhood where Demario Lowe's was murdered in 2001, just a mile away from the Arts District, and I have yet to see a single police officer patrolling those streets. When Erica and I crossed the bridge into Benton Harbor for the first time, we went directly to the crime scene of Demario Lowe's murder. As I always do, I wanted to get the lay of the land firsthand. But nothing was making sense. The address on the police report didn't exist. There was another house close to where the crime scene should have been, but it had a different address. After getting back to the office and comparing Google Earth aerials to the original crime scene diagram, we were still confused. So the next day, we made a return trip. And that's when we noticed a man across the street fixing his fence. We walked over, introduced ourselves, and asked about the house across the street. And he sent what appeared to be one of his grandkids into the house to get her. And that's when we met Angelique Bell. Now, over the last few weeks, we've gotten pretty friendly with Angelique. Friendly enough that on our last visit this past Monday, she explained to me how her husband wasn't exactly thrilled to see me on our first visit.
My God, I thought you were the narc.
Right.
Yeah, because you were going through the alley, doing your research, and you study, and then you started searching here, and then you stopped there. So he was like, that's the narc.
Yeah. Angelique was in a laughing mood on Monday, but that wasn't the case the first time I met her. For anyone who has been listening to the follow-up episodes leading up to the season 15 premiere, you've heard me say on a number of occasions that this case is bigger than just the one wrongful conviction. That became abundantly clear to me on that hot afternoon when I met Angelique in her front yard for the first time. She answered my questions as best she could about the old crime scene, and as we were about to walk away, she said something that stopped me in my tracks. She said that she wishes someone would tell her son's story. I immediately turned around and asked her what she meant by that. Angelique then proceeded to tell me that about a year ago, actually exactly a year ago this past Friday on June 28th of 2023, her 18-year-old son, Richard Perry, was gunned down in an alley just a few blocks from where we stood. She said that after nearly a year, there have been no arrests. She spends her days writing emails to the detective in charge of the investigation and to the prosecutor, begging them to find justice for her son. Her eyes were welling with tears when she told me that no one cares about what happened to Richard, like he never existed, or at the very least that his life was of no consequence. As she told me her story, I felt tears rising to the surface in my own eyes. I could feel my blood beginning to boil as she told me that she feels like the people of Benton Harbor are treated like animals. She said, "We need help. No one is listening to us." And without any hesitation, knowing in my mind how powerful of a force the Truth and Justice audience is, I responded, "Well, they're gonna listen now." Richard Perry's story, sadly, is not unique in Benton Harbor. In that small city, just over 2 miles from border to border, there's an entire group of mothers who rally together for support because their children have been murdered on those streets. Something has to change, and that starts with letting the world hear their stories, and hopefully opening their minds to understanding the world that Angelique is living in. Too many people hear news stories like the one you're about to listen to and simply brush it off as a violent kid getting a taste of his own medicine. The only thing we learn about Richard in this news story is that he avoided prison time and a murder through a plea deal. He's the victim, and he's really not even the focal point of the story, in the 30 seconds of attention that anyone ever bothered to pay to his murderer.
18-year-old Richard Perry was supposed to testify in the trial for Royal Robertson, but Perry was found dead in an alley about 2 weeks ago. Now, Robertson is charged with the killing of Quantree Jones back in 2021. He goes on trial next week. The judge has allowed the prosecutor to admit Perry's testimony from earlier hearings. Perry was also charged in the killing, but reached a plea deal to stay out of prison.
The entirety of Richard's involvement in the murder of Quantree Jones was that Royal Robertson, then 14, took Richard's gun, then 16, and shot and killed Quantree while he was playing basketball. Richard couldn't go outside with the other boys to play basketball because he was recovering from his own gunshot wound from just 2 weeks prior.
The mother of one of the kids that took my son to the hospital, to my understanding, Richard was just up there and a truck came around and just opened fire. And they just went to run. It was a whole lot of people up there. But as I understand, he was one of the targets. Okay. So that's why, whatever he did, he used to be a fighter. You know, kids come up in the streets and they fight, but with fists. And he was the dominant one. No one could have hands like him. So when the young men come up, I guess they obtained guns. So there's gunplay involved. And I guess they were just gunning for him, because Sean was shot as well. He had a graze back here. And Richard, a young lady came running down the street and said, "Your son was shot at the store." I'm like, "What?" You know.
Sean was shot in the same incident?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he was grazed. He was up there, and the mother of the young man, she saw them, but she wouldn't say anything, because what she said was, and that's just how it is around here, she didn't have other kids, and she don't want the young men that if she say something to come back and hurt her kids or her. So she knew who shot him. She came over here and she apologized to me, and she was in tears. She said, "But I'm scared. I have other kids." And she don't want them young men to retaliate against her for opening her mouth. That's just, I guess, the street code. You can't talk.
And this is how the cycle begins. I'm telling you Richard's story for two reasons. One, because I made a promise to Angelique and I intend to keep it. And two, because you need to understand how these young men get trapped into these impossible situations. This is how it began for Richard. This is how a promising 16-year-old boy ended up being a footnote in his own murder 2 years later. The core of the problem is lack of policing. The people living in the community of Benton Harbor have zero trust in their police department. They feel like they just don't matter, like their lives are inconsequential. You heard Angelique say that the street code dictates that you don't talk to the police. But that code comes from a very dark place and probably not from where you would expect. You don't talk to the police in Benton Harbor because the police aren't going to do anything. And so many people on those streets have learned that the hard way. So the people are left to police themselves. Not entirely unlike the scenes that you've seen in movies depicting the old American West. Back then, everyone carried a gun, and that's how disputes were settled. Not because the dirt roads of those dusty towns were full of thugs, but because there was no real policing, which left the communities with no other choice but to police themselves. If you're paying attention, you'll see that the violence has nothing to do with race. It's a tragic result of a failure in leadership. In Richard's case, he was out minding his own business, and he was shot in the leg, and his brother was also grazed by a bullet in the same shooting. Since he couldn't count on the police to protect him, he did what everyone else does to protect themselves. At 16 years old, he got himself a gun. The purpose of the gun wasn't to start trouble with or to hurt anyone. It was for protection. And he had that gun with him 2 weeks later when a 14-year-old boy named Royal Robertson took it from him and went outside to play basketball. On the court, Robertson shot Quantry Jones in the back of the head and killed him with Richard's gun. Robertson was arrested right away. There was plenty of witnesses that had seen what he did. But when Richard told his mom what had happened, she took him to the police station herself.
And I talked to him, I said, son, you're going to have to face the music. You know, you didn't do anything wrong, and you running is a sign of guilt. And that's not what we do in this family. You're going to have to man up. I took him to the police station. Only for them to tell me, oh, well, I'm like, okay. It was like, okay, you can go. And they even thought that the gun that, when he was shot, he had took Albert's gun from the house. I guess because he knew something was going on. And he didn't have a gun. So he knew something was going on. This was prior to the shooting over there. So they even came to this house to get his gun, and they thought it was a part of, the murder because they didn't have a weapon. They never gave that back. And when we left, they said, okay, we'll see you later. I'm like, okay, my son. Well, unfortunately, he won't be going home with you today. So, but I took him, and he cried, and he was like, he's dumb. He was mad at his friend because when he came back in the house after he said what he did, he wasn't remorseful, and he was having, my son was telling me, you stupid, that's dumb. So as a result of that, because he initially was charged with open murder. And once they investigated and did everything, then the charges went to tampering with evidence and all of that went down. So he had second degree and tampering with evidence. That's because they couldn't never retrieve the gun.
After Richard was charged, he reached a plea agreement that sent him to a residential program in Arizona. He excelled in the program, graduating with honors and winning several medals in athletics. Once he completed the program and graduated, Richard was able to come back home. And this is where the cycle of violence continued. Angelique wanted him to leave Benton Harbor. She knew that if he didn't get away, he would end up dead. She pled with the prosecutor to allow her to send her son to live with her older daughter or even her brother in Augusta. But Richard wasn't allowed to leave. The prosecution wanted him to serve as a witness in the Royal Robertson trial. They needed him to remain close by. He had restrictions placed on him as part of his probation that required him to stay in town and check in with his probation officer regularly, trapping him in the streets that had already nearly taken his life on 2 occasions. Recently, the Berrien County prosecuting attorney, Steve Perangeli, resigned. He's been replaced by a woman named Amy Bird, Angelique's new contact in her fight to find justice for her son.
So now, everything that's going on around here, Miss Amy Bird has to come in and kind of like restart from scratch. So I reached out to her, and I sent her a message. I'll email you. I'm going to, just like I did with when Richard was killed. I sent Hope Leach, that was his lovely lady, but I sent her a message, and in the message it was, you know, when you get these young men in the system and they do what they're supposed to do, and my son excelled at what you guys asked him to do, you let him off. Because had you let my son off, he would have lived to see another day. Not saying that, you know, whoever did this would have still tried to harm him, but I could have got him out the city. My brother lives in Augusta. He was like, sit him down here. But he had to report every 2 weeks. He had to abide by the rules. You know, my brother didn't talk to me for a while because behind that. Why you just didn't sit him here? Well, we had to go according to the rules of the law. They wouldn't let him off, so he was stuck. He was trapped. And that's what hurt me the most with the system, with the justice system. Because my words to them was, I don't want my son to die on the streets. And that's what happened. I can see if he had went to Queens Creek, made, A's and B's, excelled, honor student. The young men, the older guys that was over him, couldn't get enough of him. And I can't think of the one guy name, but he used to play for the Bengals. He used to play for professional football. And he was so pleased with him. He had some kind of banquet or something that he had to go to. He even chose him. And they even had some women flew down here from Arizona, from California, that was working with him to his funeral, to share stories with us, and show us videos. That just warmed my heart. He was a good person, but he just, got a raw deal with the system. I'm not pleased with the Benton Harbor Police Department. It's like it's just a job, and with that job, you have to have some extra or care in that. You know what I mean? Well, I'm just going, he got shot. And, I'm do my paperwork, I'm going to do this, and I'm going home. You don't reach out to me. I have to text the detective. Okay, any updates? Well, I'm out the office for a week. No visits. The stuff that you see on TV, you know how you'll have a detective come to your house and say, well, I'm doing this. None of that. The community don't trust them. They're just average, everyday Joes just with a badge to us. You know what I mean? Because you're not doing anything. You're supposed to protect and serve. You're not protecting us and you're not serving us at all. at all.
Richard Perry's murder could have been avoided, should have been avoided. And for that matter, Quantree Jones's murder could have been avoided, along with so many others. It all comes down to prioritizing the safety and well-being of the citizens that the police department and the city government are sworn to protect. Something has to change in Benton Harbor.
And it's sad because I still have another son out here, and I have to worry about him. So if he don't call me, I get on Barron County Inmate Search, and it'll tell you the date. Like today, I get on there and see who's been booked into the jail. And that's my lifestyle. I have to do that to worry about my son. Now, going Friday, my son, it'll make a year. And I'm scared because we wanted to have to celebrate him, celebrate his life. And I can't have it over there because for his birthday, some young man shot up the house. And I had grandkids outside. They just had stepped in the door, and I have a big backdrop of Richard that I'm hanging from here that we had out. I had balloons and had family over and a few of the friends. And soon as I was in the house cooking, and next thing I know, I hear there was a bullet hole in my mom's screen door. You go on head level. Just like if I'm walking there, if somebody would have been going in the door, they would have got shot in the head. There was a bullet that ended up in a house shoe. On the other side is where, when you walk in the door, there's shoes. So it was a house shoe facing back like this. So the bullet came in, and however the trajectory was, it landed in the house shoe. Bullet hole in my daughter's car. So I'm scared to celebrate my son in fear of I can't do that somebody might come and shoot up the place. I'm going to just have to pray about it. We changed locations, and we didn't even post anything. You know what I mean? We didn't even post anything. So someone had to come by, because where the porch is right there, and see the big backdrop. They had to see it and just been coming around watching. We called the police. The police was down there. It's like they just took a report. They didn't care. They didn't follow up. They have a habit of doing that. I'll call you. This is what happened. And you don't follow up. Richard even was sitting here one day, and the young man that shot him, walked past here. And they got the shooting. I had bullets in this house. They got the shooting. And I'm studying trying to think, but what did my son do to you so bad that you wanted him deaded? You know what I mean? You wanted his life gone. My mom was sitting on the back porch. She called the police. I don't even think nobody came out. Nobody even showed up.
It was a combination of all of these circumstances that led to the wrongful conviction of Jody Hill. Jody's been locked away in the Michigan Department of Corrections for a crime she didn't commit since her conviction in 2002. Now, to avoid confusion, I need to point out that at the time of DeMario Lowe's murder, Jody hadn't transitioned yet and was living as Joseph Hill. So any court documents and/or newspaper articles you may read will address her as Joseph, as will some of the people that we'll be speaking to throughout this season. DeMario Lowe's was shot to death in the doorway of an apartment building at 784 Broadway in Benton Harbor in the early morning hours of November 16, 2001. Witnesses say that Lowe's was outside of the building that night with a group of men. Some say they were arguing, others say they were just hanging out and talking. But sometime after midnight, gunfire erupted. It's believed that 8 or 9 shots were fired, and 4 of those connected with DeMario. The shooting began outside and continued into the building as DeMario fled from his attacker. He died on the floor, right outside of Sonia Lucas's door.
Only thing I heard was gunshot, because it was by my door.
Okay.
When it was by, I stayed downstairs, and the people that he was going to visit stayed upstairs. And so, I don't know what happened. Only thing I heard was gunshots. Me and my kids was laying in the bed. And the only thing I heard was gunshots, and I got my kids out the bed, put them on the floor, and I got down on the floor.
Police arrived on scene shortly after the shots were fired, and Lowe's passed away seconds after their arrival. The lead detective on the case was a man named Dan McGinnis. He was a lieutenant at the time and currently serves as the police chief in Benton Harbor. According to the police reports, it appears that McGinnis settled in his mind pretty quickly that DeMario's murder must have something to do with another incident that occurred just a few days prior. In that incident, Mario was in his car when he was approached by 2 armed men attempting to rob him. By sheer happenstance, a police officer rolled up to the scene of the robbery as it was happening and apprehended one of the offenders. The other fled on foot and got away. McGinnis suspected Jody as the accomplice in the botched robbery attempt. So, when 3 days later Mario was murdered, it seemed as though McGinnis jumped to the conclusion that it must have been Jody, killing Lowe's before he could have a chance to identify Jody as the second armed robber, or to stop him from testifying against the accomplice, who at the time was housed at the Berrien County Jail. For the first few months, the investigation into Jody proved fruitless. There simply was no evidence that Jody was on the scene of DeMario's murder that night. None. But after weeks and weeks of leaning on the witnesses, circling back to them over and over again, refusing to accept their truth, eventually McGinnis got the statements that he needed to secure a conviction. Jody Hill was convicted and sentenced to life in prison based on 0 forensic evidence, 0 eyewitnesses, and despite a verifiable alibi. The state's key evidence against her was a witness who eventually agreed to say that DeMario identified Jody as the killer with his final breaths, and an ear witness who claimed to be able to identify Jody's car based on the sound of its engine. Unlike Richard Perry's murder that still remains unsolved to this day, DeMario Lowe's case had the appearance of swift justice. When we get into the police file, you'll see that McGinnis was like a dog with a bone in his pursuit to build a case against Jody Hill, as though he really cared about bringing DeMario's killer to justice. But the reality is, in my opinion, it was the exact opposite. I don't think McGinnis cared if he got the right killer, he just needed to close his case. And he did. McGinnis cleared that case, but he did not arrest the person responsible for Lowe's murder. That's my belief. You're going to have the opportunity to make that determination for yourself over the coming weeks as I present to you how the investigation landed on Jody and how the mistakes that were made may have not been mistakes at all. When Rabia Chowdhury sent me this case back in January and I agreed to take it on, I thought it was going to be a difficult one to investigate. I knew there were going to be major hurdles I was going to have to get past in order to figure out what happened here. As it turns out, I was right. I was just wrong about what those hurdles would be. The real struggle that I've been dealing with is the Benton Harbor Police Department, and specifically Chief Dan McGinnis. McGinnis is the gatekeeper of the public records that I need to fully investigate, and the conflict of interest here is very real. When I first filed a Freedom of Information Act request for the police file, this is the response that I received. Quote, "We are asking for more time to fulfill this request. We are having trouble locating this file. Unfortunately, there was a past chief who was ignorant of document retention policy and shredded many files, including homicides. We are looking for possible backup copy of the murder book that is hopefully in evidence. Please advise if any questions. We will keep you posted." End quote. That was on March 5th. I sent a message back on the 7th suggesting that they check with the prosecutor's office for a backup copy and got no response. On March 18th, I emailed again requesting a status update. Again, no response. Nearly 2 months go by, and then on May 7th at 8:27 p.m., while I happened to be on a YouTube live stream talking about this exact situation, I finally got a response saying that the file had been located. Then 23 days later, the documents were finally handed over. And when I finally reviewed the file, all photos, recordings, interview transcripts, and dispatch logs had been removed. I immediately followed up with a series of emails pointing out the missing items and have been ghosted ever since. I even stopped by the station on 2 occasions and couldn't get anyone to come to the lobby window. On the second trip, a beat cop happened to walk in while I was there, so I left my business card and requested that Chief McGinnis give me a call regarding the records request. A few hours later, a Sergeant Todd Oakley called me and I shared my concerns with him. He informed me that McGinnis himself is the one handling the online open records requests. He promised that he would have the chief give me a call. And that is the last I've heard from the Benton Harbor Police Department. On that same day, Erica and I stopped by the prosecutor's office to check on the status of a records request that we had filed with them. There, we were informed that all crime scene photos, recordings, transcripts, dispatch logs, trial exhibits, all had been sent back to the police department after the trial. And since I'd been unable to get any response from Chief McGinnis, I decided it was time to go over his head. So I sent an email copying McGinnis and the mayor and the city manager. In the email, I explained the situation and expressed my concerns about the unprofessionalism of a public servant and their employee who refuses to even answer a single email or phone call about turning over materials that he is required by law to produce to the public upon request. I also pointed out that I believe it is an extreme conflict of interest for the person responsible for this potential wrongful conviction to also be the person controlling the flow of information about the case. It was after sending that email that I realized that the problem in Benton Harbor is even bigger than I imagined. The response from the city leaders to that email that I sent was nothing. No response at all. They don't seem to care about finding DeMario Lowe's real killer. They don't seem to care about finding Richard Perry's killer. And they don't seem to care that Jody Hill was sent to prison for the rest of her life for a crime she did not commit. I've been told by every single person that I've spoken to on the streets of Benton Harbor that the police and the city officials don't care about them. And sadly, I'm starting to realize that they're exactly right. In my ignorance, I really thought that the most difficult part of this case was going to be earning the trust of the people of Benton Harbor. The people who lived in the neighborhoods where all of the violence is occurring. I truly didn't think that anyone would be willing to talk to a couple of white podcasters knocking on their doors. But I was so wrong. When I walked up to Angelique's doorstep, she didn't see 2 white people that didn't belong in her neighborhood. She saw a man and a woman who cared, who were there to help.
Why'd you agree to sit down and do an interview with us?
You know, somebody need to hear me. You said, do you think I'm being heard? Well, you heard me because you asked me. Maybe somebody might hear this and say, well, we need to do something about it. Why does this community feel like the police don't care? The police won't protect them and serve them. They're not doing that. You know, however the message get out, and then I had a god brother, and he told me, you got a powerful voice, because I used to be a teacher. You need to get it out there. You talk. You need to talk. And when you guys came by, I'm like, hey, God sent somebody here. Somebody want to hear me, you know. So I don't have a problem. I'll talk to you guys. I'll talk to anybody that want to listen and hear me and feel my pain.
This is my message to Jody Hill and Angelique Bell and the people of Benton Harbor who feel like no one is listening to their cries for help. I promise you this. They're going to listen now. Truth and Justice is an NBI Studios production. Co-written and produced by Erica Bergenham. Music for Season 15 is created and composed by Caden Ladislaw. Follow-up episodes are co-hosted by Janet Varney and Zach Weaver. Our logo font was created by Tate Krupa of Red Swan Graphic Design. Our website is created, managed, and maintained by Katie Ross of createdintandem.com. Thank you to our volunteer transcription team, Erica Cantor, Kathy McElhaney, Courtney Wimberly, Kaywood Yomnick, Danielle Rohr, Jennifer Athey, and Caroline Dwyer. Truth and Justice provides all investigative and advocacy work for the wrongfully convicted completely free of charge. We're able to do that in large part thanks to you, our listeners, through your generous pledges on Patreon. Patreon accounts for the overwhelming majority of our funding. The number one way you can support our work is to become a patron at patreon.com/truthandjustice. For just $5 a month, you'll get all episodes ad-free, a bonus pregame episode every Wednesday, and also a video version of the Friday follow-ups exclusive to our patrons. Patrons also get to participate and join the chat live in many of our interviews and get early access to much of our content. Just go to patreon.com/truthandjustice to sign up. You can also help us out by going to iTunes and leaving us a 5-star rating and review. It doesn't cost you a penny and goes a long way towards making the show more visible. If you have a new case that you'd like us to consider, you can submit your cases on our website, truthandjusticepod.com. Just click on the case submission button and fill out the form. You can always keep in touch with us through our email at theories@truthandjusticepod.com. You can like our Facebook page or join in on the conversation on the official Truth and Justice Podcast fans page. You can also connect with us on social media platform X @TruthJusticePod. And to follow our personal accounts on social media, I can be found at Bob Ruff Truth. Janet can be found at Janet Varney, and Zach is at Z to the Q. However you do it, stay engaged and stay in touch. But as for now, we're signing off. I'm Bob Ruff.
I'm Zach Weaver.
And I'm Janet Varney.
And this has been Truth and Justice.